So I'm very happy to introduce you to Margaret McKinnon, Dr. Margaret McKinnon. On the academic side, she holds the Homewood Chair in Mental Health and Trauma, and she's a professor and associate chair of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, McMaster. And then in her spare time, clinically, she's the research lead in mental health and addictions, and she's a senior scientist for Homewood Research Interests. So Margaret brings with us a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of experience. So Margaret.
Thank you so much, Sister Ann. And I just want to begin by thanking everyone here for their service. I work very closely with the Canadian military, and what we do with one another is we say thank you for your service. And I want to acknowledge all of your service that I know that you've given throughout the pandemic. I have tremendous respect for the work that you do. I understand how important the chaplaincy and the work of theologians is throughout this pandemic. And in fact, in the mental health work that I do, I see time and time again how people are turning to their faith and to faith leaders to help them through this pandemic. I'm also traveling with the Chief of Psychiatry at Veterans Affairs Canada right now in Western Canada. And she asked me to also pass along her respect to you and to thank you as well for your service. So I just wanted to start by saying that. Also, I was educated by the Ursuline nuns, so I also have a lot of respect for the sisters, and I want to thank Sister Ann very warmly for this invitation. So I'm going to put on my slides now. Okay, so I want to again thank Sister Ann for the really warm introduction. I want to also begin by acknowledging that the land that St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton and McMaster University sits upon falls upon the traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee nations and is protected within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. And here at St. Joseph's Healthcare Hamilton and McMaster University, we seek to walk with Indigenous peoples and to create an environment where the gifts of all people and the Indigenous people can be shared and recognized. So today I'm here to talk to you about the COVID pandemic. And as everyone here on the screen is aware, our world has really shifted throughout the pandemic. And I think for all of us, we found that our mandates, our expectations, and our roles changed almost overnight back in March of 2020. And I work clinically, particularly with healthcare workers right now, and many talk in particular about the uncertainty that they face throughout the pandemic, and a sense that we don't know how long this will last. There's a sense of timelessness and a sense that we don't necessarily know what the future holds. I think as we sit here right now with the possible advent of the fourth wave and not knowing what that will bring, we face that uncertainty, and that can certainly give rise to feelings of anxiety. And we're going to talk about that today, along with some strategies to manage that anxiety. But I'd also like to reflect that I think the pandemic has also taught many of us, again, that value of service, and how when we experience great cultural change and cultural shifts, it also provides an opportunity to make lasting change, which can assist many people. And so I just want to reflect upon that as well as we talk about the pandemic. At the same time that we're facing the COVID-19 pandemic, as Martin Luther King reminded us, the moral arc of the universe also sways towards justice. And I think it's important for us to remember that many people right now are in communities that also face haunting reminders of the past. And here I think, for example, about the murder of George Floyd and how really that brings back memories of the past. And these social movements, which are so important to rectify racial inequity and injustice, can also bring back those memories. And so when I talk to groups like healthcare workers, I always want to acknowledge that we're facing the burden of the pandemic right now, but there are also other things happening in the world that can also bring stress and strain and anxiety. And I think as people who serve, it's important for us to remember that as well. So before I talk, I just want us to go through some provisos around the pandemic. And I think it's really important for us to remember as leaders, as students, as educators, that this is truly an unprecedented situation. And we know that no one can fully prepare for a pandemic. And so I remember at the outset of this pandemic, we often heard questions around the decisions made by leaders, questions about how personal protective equipment were being offered and so on. And Many of those questions were justifiable, but of course, we also want to remember that it's impossible to fully prepare for a situation like this. I think the other lesson that we've learned over the course of this pandemic is that this is not a sprint, we're rather in a marathon. And so that marathon will have bursts of energy where we're very focused and we have many activities and tasks to do, where there's periods of heightened uncertainty. But in a marathon, that extends over time. And we do need to conserve our energy as well over the course of that marathon. I think it's also really important for us to remember that we're all in this together and that we're all learning about this together. We're here, we stand together at the face of this uncertainty and this challenge to serve together. It's also important, I think, to remember in many of these situations that there are no right or no wrong answers. Again, we're all trying our best, and there often are many solutions to a problem. It's trying to work together to find the best one. What I always like to remind people too, in the midst of all of this, is that everyone is trying their best. We really are trying to do the best that we can, be that as academic leaders, as students, as teachers, as healthcare workers. On average, we really are trying to do our best, and that demands a level of patience with one another that can be difficult at times to have. As I said again, really this pandemic has altered every facet of our daily lives. And we also see that uncertainty being met on the economic fronts, political fronts, and social fronts. But a time of loss is also an opportunity to make lasting changes for the good of all, and that includes those who are vulnerable. I want to also make a comment as a clinical psychologist. So when we think about trauma and when we think about stress and strain like that associated with the pandemic, many of us do experience anxiety and uncertainty during this time. But I think as people who serve, we also need to be aware that for people who have experienced trauma, many of them may say in this situation, this is everything that I ever expected. Other people now know what I lived through and I am fine. So I think the message here that I'm giving is that we have a whole host of responses, often that are anxious in relation to the pandemic. But for some people, this has really mirrored their everyday experience. And for them, it's very different than what others might experience. And so if we serve in the chaplaincy or as we serve as healthcare professionals, it's important for us to remember that not everyone will necessarily have the same response to this situation. But Sister Anne did share with me, and I think it's really important to acknowledge some of the stresses and some of the strains that we are experiencing. And this can include uncertainty about what in-classroom instruction might look like, concerns about, safety at the university or in the communities that we serve, concerns about how one will manage with family members, because I know that many of you are also caring for young children or caring for elderly family members. How are you going to balance that desire or need to care for them with what you're facing within the classroom and the challenges that you face as a person who serves? And this can certainly give rise to anxious feelings. So I want to talk a little bit about some strategies that we can use to manage that anxiety. And then I also want to talk to you as we proceed along the talk about a concept called moral injury. And moral injury has been acknowledged all the way throughout history and certainly within theology. And I'm going to talk to you about the unique moral injuries that people are experiencing throughout this pandemic as well. Because I think in the service that you do and the learnings that you have over the course of the next year, I think the concept of moral challenges throughout the pandemic will also be very, very pervasive and something for you also to be aware of and that you may face yourself in these situations. So when I think about managing anxiety-related thoughts, it's really important for us to understand how we might overestimate in some cases how dangerous something may be. And that's not to say the situation is not dangerous, because in some situations it is, and we don't want to just say, no, there is no danger and cast that aside. We want to acknowledge realistically what is the likelihood of something happening. And what we often do when we're anxious, and I'm a person who has suffered from PTSD, who has suffered from depression in my life, and I always want to acknowledge that and say that because I think it's tremendously important to challenge the stigma that surrounds mental health conditions. I know what it's like to experience this anxiety. And what we often do is we make overestimates of the likelihood of something happening. And that's a cognitive bias that we all have in our brain. It's something about the way our brain is structured that we tend to overestimate the likelihood of something happening. And so it can be important to acknowledge that often we may be overestimating the likelihood of a danger occurring. We also often engage in catastrophic thinking. And in psychology, what we call that is the hot thought. So when something happens or when we're anxious, what is that first very emotional thought that we have? So for example, when someone says something to you, like your partner may say to you, I'm very angry at you. Sometimes we have this hot thought that that person is going to leave or abandon us. And that's a catastrophic thought. And so that's what we often do in situations like the pandemic, where we jump quickly to that most catastrophic thought and don't think about the shades of gray in between. Sometimes too, we can have very overly rigid rules. So an example of that may be that I feel that when I enter into this room, I must be wearing, an N95 mask with a face shield, and that's the only way I can possibly be safe. But in fact, there are other ways of being safe in situations, and it can be difficult, but we want to open our minds to what is the realistic evidence, what is the realistic danger, and not rely on an really rigid view of how we need to do things. We can also make assumptions about situations that can provoke anxiety. A good example of that is I was traveling on a plane this morning, and I might have gotten onto that plane and assumed that everyone on board has COVID-19, but we know again that that's highly unlikely. But if I had that assumption, it can again provoke that anxiety. We can also have very negative core beliefs about ourselves. And I want to acknowledge this because I am a trauma psychologist. So I do want to talk a bit about that. Oftentimes we can have beliefs that we develop throughout childhood that we don't deserve better, that we deserve to contract the virus, for example. And that may seem like an odd thing to say, but I think you'll find in the people that you work with, particularly those who are vulnerable and who have experienced anxiety, there can often be that core belief that I deserve for something negative to happen to me. And when people have that belief, they often do things that can put themselves in more danger. So for example, they may not go to their physician for regular medical appointments. They may take unnecessary risks. And I can't simply say to you to believe in your own self-worth or to believe that you deserve, but I can say to you it's important to recognize that we all have self-worth and we all deserve the best. We can also have impulses, and we may also have imagery in our head where we may build that worst case scenario in our head. And oftentimes we can sort of create that situation, we imagine it. So we imagine a future where things are negative and dangerous. I'm going to encourage you to, rather than to imagine those negative situations, instead to imagine something positive happening, to imagine yourself going to class and maybe even thinking about who's around you, all the things that have been done to protect you in this situation. And before you go, maybe try to imagine yourself in that situation with a sense of calm, with a sense of well-being, rather than imagining that worst case scenario, which often we have a tendency to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a tendency that we have, but we can try to overcome that by imagining ourselves in a different situation and really having that vivid imagery around that. So I've talked to you a lot about some of those assumptions that we may have when we're feeling anxious. And one of the most important things that we can do is recognize and become aware of those assumptions or cognitive biases. So I've gone through a list there of some of the anxiety-provoking thoughts or feelings that we may have. And having an awareness of that can often be very helpful. When I was growing up, there was a course called the Dale Carnegie course. I think people still take that. And I always remembered one thing that they said in that course was that, we can imagine the worst possible thing happening, but sometimes we need to imagine what would we do instead? How could we cope with that? Or what could we do instead? And by being aware of those biases, we can help to challenge them. So for example, considering a possible alternative. So that possible alternative, as I said, might be imagining yourself in a very vivid way, sitting in that classroom, wearing your PPE, but also knowing that all around you, people have done things to help make you feel safe in that situation. It's also really important for us to evaluate the evidence regarding anxiety-related beliefs and assumptions and predictions. So how sort of thinking about what is the realistic evidence for what might happen here? What is the realistic risk of what's happening? And two ways of doing that are through decatastrophizing. So sometimes it's important for us to think realistically, what is the worst possible thing that could happen here? And then think, how would I cope with that? Trying to think of an example of that. I can tell you, for example, when I was younger, I was on a plane and that plane was traveling to Portugal and it ran out of fuel midway over the Atlantic, and we were prepared for the ditching of that aircraft at sea. This is a very extreme example, but I want to give it to you because in that moment, I had to imagine what is the worst possible thing that could happen in this moment. And I knew in that moment that my husband and I may die, but I was able to think about the worst possible thing and in that moment accept that, because it helped me to imagine and cope with what was to come. So sometimes that ability to imagine that and think, how would I cope, can be very helpful in these situations. Another way is to do a pie chart where we say, what is the realistic likelihood of risk here? So what is the realistic likelihood that everyone in this room that I'm in has a diagnosis of COVID? And when you look at the numbers and you think about how many people in Ontario, how many people at the University of Toronto, how many people within this class are likely to actually have COVID? And you will see that in that pie chart is going to be a very small slice. And taking the time to imagine those statistics and those probabilities can also be of assistance. But I will say overall that there's a concept that we all learned in childhood, is that, you know, when you fall off the horse, you want to get back on. And we find when we study anxiety and we look at anxiety, one of the most effective ways truly for managing anxiety is exposure. And that is the concept of actually being in the situation that you fear. We don't want you to go to the situation that you fear the most first, because that can be very difficult. So a good example would be, you know, I was very afraid to fly after this accident, and I went first to places where I exposed myself gradually to my worst fear. So I would, for example, go to the airport and sit there. I might, you know, watch planes taking off, and I was gradually building exposure to the thing that I feared the most. Here we're talking about fear, it may be a fear or uncertainty about being in person in class. And so what you might want to do is gradually expose yourself to a situation like that. And that could be, for example, walking on campus, being among other people. You might want to go to the building at U of T where your classes are held, sit in the lobby, sit outside the classroom, and gradually expose yourself to being in that environment. And this may occur before even a single class is held, because having that opportunity to be there and expose yourself gradually to your fear can be helpful. And then when you do come to class, for some people, they'll find that they're able to go to class and will be okay. But for some people, it's going to need to be more gradual. So for example, you may say, I can only tolerate 10 or 15 minutes of this. I can only tolerate half an hour. And what you want to do in situations like that is gradually build your muscle. So we always talk about that in mental health. How do we gradually build that muscle where we can overcome some of that fear and anxiety? And so I think it's important to recognize that for some people, it will be okay to go the first time and it will be okay. For some people, they may need more of a gradual return to in-person activities, should that be the case here. It's also most helpful with exposure to situations that we fear is that we don't want to do it for too short of a time. So for example, going to the classroom or going to a hospital where you may be serving, going to a church where you may be serving, we don't want to sit there for too short of a time. If we sit there for 10 seconds and we don't allow ourselves to experience the emotions that we have in that moment, then we may leave too early and not build that muscle. So I wanted to say that it is important to try to spend time there and don't just leave in the moment that you feel the most fear, but allow yourself to experience those emotions for as long as that you can tolerate. It's also important, and it can be helpful to practice doing this in different settings. So not just, at the U of T campus, but in other settings as well. There also are techniques for when you are in those situations that again can be helpful. One technique is called progressive muscle relaxation. And I work a lot with military members who have returned from combat, from first responders who have been to really difficult calls. What we talk about is ways to control that anxiety when they go back into the combat theater, or when they go back, for example, in the police car or on the fire truck. And some of the things that they do in these situations is progressive muscle relaxation. This is a very simple technique where you can tense a particular muscle in your body. So for example, you could tense your arms and bring them in and feel the tension in those arms. And then what I'd like you to do when you do that is to pay attention, and we can all practice doing that together. Let's just tense in our shoulders like this and draw our fists in together. And as you do that, what I'd like you to do is to become very aware of your body and how you feel in this situation. What we call this in trauma is we call this grounding. So when we're feeling very overwhelmed by a situation, or very overwhelmed by anxiety or stress or trauma, we can pay careful attention to our body as a way of grounding ourselves in the moment, helping to overcome that anxiety. That's one way of doing it, through our body. Another way that you can do that is by focusing on something that you see in your environment. So focusing, for example, it could be on a child in the room, it could be on another person, it could be on a site that's very beautiful, but just focusing in with that laser focus on one thing that you can see. We can also use our sense of taste to do that. So in a situation that's very overwhelming or stressful, putting a hard candy in your mouth and sucking on that candy and paying attention to the sensation of the candy in your mouth and how it feels is another way of grounding yourself when you're feeling overwhelming emotion. So there's different ways of doing that muscle tension and relaxation, focusing on sights, focusing on sounds, tastes, and that could be a way of grounding yourself in a situation that's very overwhelming. Another way that you could do is when we're anxious, we also tend to breathe very quickly and very rapidly. Another way to do this is really to help ourselves to relax, is to put our hand on our stomachs, and then to breathe very deeply, and to fill your stomach with air. And then in which you do that, feeling your hand as your belly expands, and then gradually releasing that breath. That's another technique that we use with the military to help them to be in the moment and to feel safer and less anxious in a particular situation. And I would just encourage you to do that in situations where you do feel anxious or overwhelmed. Another thing that we also focus on really heavily is mindfulness. And mindfulness is being in the present moment. It's not worrying about the future or dwelling on the past, but being in that moment, just being in the moment where you are. And this could involve being very mindful as you eat food and chewing it very slowly, focusing on the sensation of the food, sucking on a candy where you can again be mindful. You could listen to the sounds around you and be in the moment. But that mindfulness for some people can be very helpful. As a person who's had PTSD, I would say for me, I find it very difficult because I find it difficult to be in my body. So again, it really does depend on the individual. And I want to say, as I talk about these techniques, they won't work for everyone. And what we want to do is find the one or two that work for us. So as you go through some of these techniques, as I talk about, you shouldn't necessarily expect that everyone will work for you. You want to find the one that's best for you. When I go into the ICU, which I do sometimes now to talk to nurses, I say to them, what is the thing in the past that helped you the most? When you've been in a situation that's been very stressful or overwhelming, what helped you before? And that may be taking a hot bath, that may be having a cup of tea, that might be calling a friend. So I'm talking a lot here today about some techniques that we use in psychology, but sometimes it can also be something as simple as what's helped you in the past before. And so, sometimes when we're in a room, for example, I did a little bit of training with the Hamilton Police as they interview victims of assaults. And I said to them, you might want to give that person a cup of hot tea, allow them to hold that cup of hot tea and feel the warmth of the cup of that tea on their hands. That could be another technique that you may have used in the past for yourself that you may also find helpful. So again, think about what works best for you. Think not only about these psychology techniques, but also about what's helped you in the past as well. So Randy McCabe is my colleague. She was formerly the chief of psychology at St. Joe's and is now a director there. I really liked, she gave some advice to students at McMaster about their return to studies at the university. And just like like I said a few moments ago, for some, again, it can be really helpful for us to dive back into our old routines. So some of us, when we go back to class and back into the classroom, this will actually be helpful because we're escaping that sensation of being in a space where we're confined, where we're worried. I drive to St. Joe's, and I find that so helpful for me to go and drive there and have that sensation of going to work, to be with my friends, to be with the community. But that can be helpful for some people. So I just want to emphasize that you may find when you get back into the classroom, it actually is really helpful to be there. Others, as I said before, may benefit from a more gradual approach and changing one thing gradually. So gradually going somewhere, gradually changing something that you're doing. That may be, for example, if you're ordering all of your groceries, or if you're not going to the grocery store, a gradual change where you go in some of the time. It's also important, though, to pay attention to how we're feeling in the moment, to do what feels right for us, but again, challenging ourselves to do new things and then reflecting on our experience. You may find that you imagine going somewhere in person and you imagine it's going to be very overwhelming for you. If you find it's not that overwhelming, when you go home, I want to encourage you to reflect on that and think about how that wasn't quite as difficult as I imagined it to be. So reflect back on what your experience really was. Realistically, how did you feel in that moment? I also give a lot of talks to leaders, and I know that all of you are leaders in the work that you do. And so really, if you're dealing with others who are experiencing anxiety, I'd encourage you to talk about how they're feeling. I'd also encourage you and the people that you help to reach out for mental health supports when needed. I always say to people, it's not shameful to have a mental health condition. You can be your own hero. You can be the person who reaches out for the supports that you need. And when you do that, you're also showing others what it means to care for themselves. So for example, a father who struggles with depression, or a leader who struggles with depression, who gets help, he or she is showing the wider community what it is to seek help and to seek supports. And I actually think that's being a hero in so many ways. So again, I want to challenge that stigma that surrounds mental health and say, if you need support as well, please reach out for it. And in reaching out for that support, you're also doing a service to others and showing them that they can also reach out for that help. When I go into healthcare groups and I talk about my own struggles with mental health, many say to me, I can actually reach out for help because I see someone else like you who has experienced that and who's open about it. And I think when we share our own challenges and our own emotions and struggles, that's also very important for others. It's an act of service. One thing that we have also done, I think, a lot during the pandemic is we're also trying to keep on top of information surrounding it. But it is helpful to also sometimes take a breather. So while you want to look for information, also take time out and stick to trustworthy sources. We also want to focus on what we can control in situations like this. Some of the things that we can control in a situation like this is we can wash our hands often, we can avoid touching our face, we can avoid non-essential activities like shopping, and we can try to get adequate sleep and taking care of our body and our well-being. But I'll tell you, the number one predictor of who develops PTSD or trauma-related illness is social supports. And so even when there are times when we will probably have to be physically apart in the upcoming months, I would really encourage you to stay connected, stay in touch with families and friends, with classmates, and don't let that pandemic dominate every conversation. I'm going to say one more thing here on techniques. Give yourself permission as well to take a break from your anxiety. What we can often do very consciously is say, as I worry, I think that my worry will control the situation I'm going to face, but it won't actually control it, which is hard to accept. But also give yourself permission to say, I'm going to take a break, even for an hour, half an hour from my anxiety. I'm giving myself that permission to take a break from it. And you may find as well that by giving yourself permission, saying, I'm going to take that break from this, will open up that possibility of being in a world where you're not facing that anxiety all the time. I just want to check in on time because I have a tendency to talk a lot. How are we for time?
I think we are close to the first session's time. We're almost up.
Okay, I always talk too much. So let me just, if I could be Dawes for 5 more minutes, is that all right, Emil?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. I did want to talk to you, but just one concept of moral injury, because I think this is something that you will likely face in the work that you do. And so moral injury in the military and in the first responder community, we call this a signature wound of service. This is what happens when we find ourselves in situations that challenge our moral or ethical values, or we're in situations where we feel that an institution or an individual has a duty to care for us, but hasn't done so. And I always like to take this from the first person perspective. And this is as a veteran who was in Vietnam, and we interviewed him and we asked him, what would it be like if someone could see inside of you? And what this veteran said, and I'm sure many of you who serve are familiar with hearing this from others, and he said, if others could see inside of me, it would be really scary. I feel like they could see a kind of stain upon my soul. I feel a sense of shame about that being in that situation in Vietnam. And I also feel a sense of shame about some of the things that I witnessed and I couldn't do anything about. And he talked about a case where a grenade was thrown into a hole. So what he's talking about when he came home with those struggles with the ethical things that he faced within the combat theater. And he also said that when he came home, that he was afraid to tell his story to others. He said, if I told others about the situation that I was in, they might run. And that when I look at others who haven't had these experiences, it's like looking into the eyes of a baby. They're just that innocent. And I wish that I had some of that innocence back. And that's something I wish very often. And what this veteran is teaching us is that for many people who have experienced trauma or stress throughout the pandemic, they may feel that they can't share those experiences with us, that we can't possibly hear what they've experienced or seen because it might harm us. But as chaplains, or theologians, or people who serve, I think it'd be really encouraging to them to say, I understand that you've seen and experienced some very difficult things throughout this pandemic. You will not hurt or harm me by telling you the story. I am here to help. And what we're certainly finding in the hospitals is that many people, healthcare workers, are turning to chaplains in hospitals to tell them their stories of what they've experienced throughout the pandemic. And so this may be something that you hear about in the work that you do and the moral struggles that people have faced. We certainly know that throughout this pandemic, the moral injury has extended to the healthcare community. And I'm just going to give you a few examples before I close this talk. But one example that healthcare workers are commonly giving is that they're often experiencing a sense of guilt about people dying alone in hospital. And as we all know, there have been cases where we could not allow visitors into hospital at a certain point within the pandemic. And often healthcare workers were the people who held that person's hand while they died, who held the iPads while they communicated with family members. And some healthcare workers, I've been interviewing them across the country for a study we're doing at St. Joe's and McMaster, and they talk about how they struggle with the moral weight of not being able to allow, for example, visitors to come into those rooms. And what I often say, I give them words and I say, this is a sense of moral injury, that you were in situations where you had to struggle with ethics and values of a situation. But I want you to imagine how grateful that patient was that you were there with them during that sacred time. I want you to imagine how grateful their son or their daughter may have been that you were there holding their mom and dad's hand. And so as we think about some of the injuries that people are experiencing, some of the spiritual or existential injuries that people are facing throughout this pandemic, there are ways of thinking about the value of self-compassion and care for others. If we think as well, just one final thing that I'll say, when people are struggling with anxiety and they're struggling with moral stresses, with difficulties that they've faced, I think it's really important for us to give the same care and compassion that we give to others to ourselves. And so what I sometimes say to people and to healthcare workers is, what would you say right now if this was your daughter facing this situation, or this was your brother or your child? What would you say? And then I have them practice saying that to their daughter or to their colleague or someone that they care about. And I say, I want you to turn that same voice onto yourself, that same voice of care and compassion. So what I'd like to conclude this talk by saying is that I do recognize that for all of you, I'm certain that you are facing anxiety, uncertainty, and concerns. But I want us to hear and to listen to those concerns that you're having, to think about strategies that we can use to try to help with some of that. But I want to also encourage those values of self-compassion and having all that tremendous care that you show through your profession for others. I want you to think about that same care and that same compassion for yourself as well. And I'm going to end on that note and really thank you so much for the opportunity to come and talk to you, and to end by again thanking you for your service and what you're doing for others during this time. So thank you. Thank you, Neil. Christopher. I wonder if anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask. If there's no questions, that's okay.
That was an awesome presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I could probably talk for 2 hours, so I'm sorry. I always have too many slides.
Margaret,
you had several slides which talked about the book that had the cover of the book, the Anti-Anxiety Program,
Yes.
a workbook of proven strategies. That book isn't currently available in the University of Toronto Library collection, but it will be available as an ebook in 2 or 3 days.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Noel. Yes, because that book, Marty Anthony, who wrote that book, he was a psychologist at St. Joe's in Hamilton. And those techniques, I just want to acknowledge that they were developed at St. Joe's in Hamilton. So just wanted to say that. So yeah.
I'll send out an email to all theology students when that book's available.
Thank you so much, Noel. I want to also highlight that in the province of Ontario right now, there is free psychotherapy available for all people in Ontario. It's called iCBT, so small I, CBT. If you Google iCBT and Ontario, you can register for free online therapy. That's available to anyone in the province. I would always encourage people who are struggling to reach out to their family physician, to reach out for supports, but also this is another method that's also available in the province of Ontario to everyone. There's also a portal that was developed by the federal government, an online portal called the Wellness Together portal. That is also free of charge for all Canadians, and that also provides support. So if you're at home one night and you're really struggling, that is also there available to you.
If there aren't any other questions, thank you, Margaret, for that wonderful session.
Thank you.
Over to you, Darren.
Thanks, Emil. I'm very happy to welcome home, Dr. Christopher De Bono, who is an alumnus of the University of St. Michael's College. He wrote a dissertation entitled An Exploration and Adaptation of Anton T. Boison's Notion of the Psychiatric Chaplain in Responding to Current Issues in Clinical Chaplaincy. So Chris is one of our illustrious alumni, and he's had over 20 years experience in the field of healthcare and ethics leadership. And he's currently the Vice President of Mission, Organizational Development and Ethics at Providence in Vancouver. He previously served as the Vice President of Mission, People and Ethics, and was the executive sponsor for Indigenous Wellness and Reconciliation. He's also been an ethicist at Toronto Central Community Care Access, the Center for Clinical Ethics, and Waypoint in Penetang. And he's been chaplain. So he's been a chaplain at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, St. Elizabeth's and Mount Sinai, as well as an instructor at St. Paul's, at Emmanuel College, and right here at St. Mike's. He is deeply involved in the issue of COVID-19 and has just written a co-authored piece called A Rapid Review of Home-Based Activities that Can Promote Mental Wellness During the COVID-19 Pandemic. So he's especially well positioned to share some insights with us today on our topic. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much. Darren, can I just check whether you can hear me all right?
We can.
And can you see my screen as well?
We can.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Darren. And thanks, Margaret, for getting us going in such a good way. It is, as you were speaking, I had a number of check boxes that were going off in terms of the kind of work that we're supporting as well in healthcare. And I just wanted to call out one really important piece that I heard you talk about, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well in a related way, but just the call out to the really important role of leadership. Yep. And honest communication as leaders. I really, really appreciated the emphasis you put on that. And I hope today that this invitation, and that's what I'm calling it, is to live your spiritual life at St. Mike's Theology in these complex, and as Margaret also used the word, unprecedented times. And I'm putting the word please in there because I think this is a marathon, and it's an invitation for you to think about how you can thrive and flourish in these interesting times. I too would like to begin in a good way. It is really, really a pleasure to be sharing with you at a place I consider my home back in Toronto, but I reached out to you from Vancouver, and I celebrate the unceded ancestral traditional territories of all of BC's Indigenous peoples, but especially the three host nations where I live, the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. And I recognize that most of you, except for those calling in from Calgary and elsewhere, and Regina, that most of you are in the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Neshbeg and the Chippewa and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat, and all of the diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who live in our urban centers as well. So I was really pleased to receive this invitation from Darren and St. Mike's. And my task was to talk a little bit with you about spirituality in the context of your theology experience. So I'd like to cover how COVID and contemporary church issues are going to play into your invitation that I'm making to live your spirituality. I'd like to use a personal story because I think, just as Margaret has said, they're really, really helpful to think about what it means to be a student or a prof in theology. And I'd like to end with linking this to your strat plan, which, as you'll see as I end, is already ahead of the curve in terms of why spirituality matters from a wholesomeness perspective. So I hope you'll at least learn, and even better, always good to be reminded that an integrated spirituality matters to the theology program, but not just for the good of your theology faculty, but for the good of society and of the church. So first, a thanks. It's a nice, safe return for me. We're all safe distancing on this call, but more importantly for you, I've been able to follow the administration's work, the faculty's work, the library leadership's work, and especially some of the facilities work that you're doing on campus to create safe spaces. And you've been doing that for over 18 months. So I really can say that although I work in a healthcare organization, the most important part for us has been as leadership to show that we're making the changes that create safe spaces. And just as Margaret said, it's not that they're with zero risk, but the work that we've done in terms of facility work, in terms of when people can work remotely, how classes can be taught that you've done, is actually a remarkable skill of facility management. So I really want to call that out, and I know you'll get some direct mention about some of the other facilities work going on, but I think the physicalness of what we're trying to do is so important, and I just want to thank the leadership for your work there. But I also want to remind you that in unprecedented times, this is also a part of your core mission and your strategic plan to always be thinking about the role of spirituality, especially at unstable times. So Darren was able to give a overly generous introduction to me. All I wanted to do that I've learned from my work with Indigenous communities here is it's always good to at least give a sense of who you are and when you're speaking. So I just wanted to call out that, yeah, in 1993, I did my BA there, and through Regis, my MDiv, and returned home to St. Mike's for my PhD in 2012. And part of what I'm going to suggest is possible in terms of a spiritual life while being a theology student or faculty member is that, hey, this place generates some amazing people that have gone on to do great things in challenging times. And I count each of you as part of those invited to do that. And just for fun, because I live in Vancouver, I can snowshoe mountains, which are kind of fun, and go swimming in the ocean at the same day sometimes, you never know. Okay, so what are these times? I think Margaret's given a really great and thorough understanding of the health effects of COVID, especially as they relate to mental health. I also want to call out that one of the things that I think is really, really important to think about theologically is the effects that COVID has had on people's isolation. So I underscore Margaret's point about social supports, and I'll come back to that in terms of why it's important for the church to be thinking about this and all of its ministries, education, healthcare, et cetera, social services. I also want to say that, just as Margaret had said, these are really difficult times for anything church related. The disclosures about burial grounds at the Indian residential schools, and I will note the ground zero of that happened within my jurisdiction here within the historical Archdiocese of Vancouver at Kamloops or Tecumseh First Nation, didn't reveal something that we didn't already know, to be quite honest. It revealed something that we had failed to hear. And when these kinds of things happen, I think as academics and as people that are in the work of research that our students are doing, this really matters because substantial ecclesial failings call us to even greater creativity in terms of how we support the church to do better. So I can say, as someone who has graduated out of these programs, that the links that we're able to do with ecclesial bodies, orders, et cetera, has worked incredibly better here in Vancouver because of the relationships that St. Mike's prepared me for about thinking about how to serve society and how to serve the relationships that can bring healing. And what I'd like to come home today with is that the invitation is to live a credible, living, and integrated spirituality has never, ever been more important than it is right now. And at times like this, I can, oh my goodness, Christopher saying it can never be more important. Well, let me tell you one of my favorite prayers, and you'll all know it is the Serenity Prayer. I often say this one, and it dovetails really nicely again with what Margaret was saying about why one might want to know more factually what is going on. So not to over-catastrophize nor to under-catastrophize. I think the idea of knowing what we can change and what we can't change is the beginning of wisdom. So for me, it allows me to know both as a leader and as a person working and living in a city and with many other people, what my agency is. So this is important for each of you as faculty and as staff and students. And for me personally, it just lessens my anxiety. And it's not for no reason that this prayer has held the test of time on this. And perhaps this prayer also reminds us of asking a really important question in this context of what does spirituality mean? So I know for me in the research that I was able to do in the dissertation that Darren spoke about was to dive quite deeply into what spirituality in a contemporary time can be. I really like Ron Rolheiser's very contemporary idea of spirituality is what we do with the fire inside of us. It's why we get up in the morning, etc. And he's a really, really good contemporary author on this. But I must say that I found the work of Sandra Schneider, who is an academic, a little more helpful to the work that I was trying to do in terms of critically thinking about how you and I might consciously strive to integrate our lives, not in ways that are isolating or not in ways that are self-absorptive, but in a way that brings us to self-transcendence towards an ultimate value that one perceives. And I will readily say this is a very academic piece, but what it does do, I think that is important for each of you and for me, is it positions spirituality very broadly. It can be religious or non-religious spirituality, But as theologians within the Catholic tradition, and I'll come back to your strategic plan there about mining the Catholic intellectual tradition, it gives us a way to talk about a healthy spirituality that isn't focused on the self in a self-absorptive way. Certainly when I hire staff to work in the different programs that come in within my portfolio, this idea of not being about me, but being about the service that is offered through a very integrated me is really, really important. And let me tell you a little bit of a personal story that was helpful for me when I was studying theology. So I've already shared that part of my spirituality in terms of certainly meditative and contemplative has always been about a sense of service to others. So you can see why Schneider's is helpful for me because it takes me towards other people, towards other goods in society. And I'm just going to shine a little light on Ann Anderson here. I was doing my doctoral work. I was busy researching. This was pre-COVID, but that can be stressful. I was also doing some part-time work at the time, and I began to feel that, oh my goodness, can I do this? Is this the best program? Should I shift courses or not? And I remember sitting down with Anne and having this conversation. And I looked broadly at everyone on this call in terms of profs, and there was a particular stance of listening and discerning, which is a really important part of any spirituality, that I found to be remarkably helpful in the faculty at St. Mike's. So taking time to listen and to equip me actually got me over what was really a bit of an existential crisis. And Anne helped me think about what service I wanted to do in the world, what I was discerning that service to do, and what was the best mechanism to make a change in the world. And as Darren said, it was just an amazing experience to complete the PhD dissertation. But I had to lean on people within my social community to give me support in what was at that time a difficult time. So I just want to normalize that. A lot of people ask me about what writing a PhD is like at St. Mike's, and I always say that the best PhD at St. Mike's is a done PhD, but it does require that we have a social circle around us. And I built that with a social circle of PhD students, but also by going to the faculty that could listen and equip. And faculty are not meant to be therapists. They can refer us to other places as well. But it's just, again, as we said earlier today, knowing that when you have a question to ask, where can you go for the support to know where that support can come from? And I tell that story because I've been thinking a lot about people's return to what we're calling in BC AC, which is after COVID. And we're not calling it, like normal, because we don't know what normal is going to look like. We know that BC here also stands for before COVID, and you know what your experiences were. But in the world, as the fourth wave arrives, and it will arrive, it's already started on our end, and we will get through this. Perhaps I can encourage you because you have work to do. You have courses to teach, you have courses to take, you have dissertations to write, to think about your strat plan as part of the work of a safe return. So you do talk about spirituality being rooted in the Catholic intellectual tradition, and your second part of that strat decision statement is a search for intellectual, I've highlighted spiritual and social wholeness. So I think from a practical perspective, when you look at your three strategic priorities, I really want to come to this idea that community, your first strategic priority, is part of what a good response to COVID is. It's also what a great response to some of the challenges around Indian residential schools are. And because I follow you on other media, I also want to do a little call out for your new course on understanding the relationship around Indian residential schools and the Catholic Church. And I know, Reed, you're on this call, so I just think that kind of prophetic dialogue to create safe areas to talk about really difficult things is incredibly, incredibly important. I want to say as well that when it comes to education, one of the things that I think is important, and I experienced this actually through my undergrad at St. Mike's as well as my graduate program for my PhD, is the invitation to be a whole person in the work of ministry. I can tell you, because of the responsibilities I have in healthcare, that we need to have authentic people leading mission-based work. That doesn't mean perfect people, And I really appreciated Margaret's transparency. But I mean people that are committed all in and working for the best. And that means for me, an integrated spirituality is part of the academic enterprise. And I'm really pleased that St. Mike's places such an emphasis on this, and that there is a liturgical life. And I've loved how you've moved online for that in terms of masses. And I just want to say, these are the kinds of tick boxes that are more than just hitting the mark. They're about creating the infrastructure around which people can thrive and people can feel safe. And finally, I think the sustainability piece, we're building a $2 billion hospital here in Vancouver, the new St. Paul's. We're thinking about how green that building can be, but we're also working to think theologically about why this is important for a faith-based organization like Providence. And I would encourage you, and I'm going to look forward to some of the facilities work, to think through how the improvements you're making right now really bring to life Laudato Si, for example, in terms of environment sustainability, and some of the community work from Fratelli Tutti. I'm going to move to talk a little bit about just one other thing, and then close with another reflection that I hope would be helpful for you. When we orient new staff to join our organization, we remind them that where they are now, and in our case, it's 127 years, many others have come. And I really appreciated when Margaret was talking a little bit about where the successes have been in your own life, and to realize that at a time of crisis, this is a very, very helpful way to think about, why am I feeling anxious? How can I get through this? But hey, I survived this or that in my past. That community is also a heck of a lot broader than just you. It's everyone who's gone before you. And I know that in our institution, I know St. Mike's well, others have faced challenging times, and they have done great things with great innovation. We spoke just before we started, as some of us were saying hello, about the innovations within digital platforms for the library and digital books. And I think that's amazing. I know in healthcare, we've looked at, why did it take a pandemic to have a doctor's appointment through telemedicine when we used to force people to trudge in for an outpatient visit when we could have done it just from the comfort of their own home? And we realized that some of these system changes needed a push, and they needed us to rethink what it means to provide community healthcare today. So my invitation to you, and I'll close with another reflection on a prayer that's been helpful for me on this, is be well, be safe, as Bonnie Henry says here, but search and make spirituality part of your USMC theology work. I really, really do invite our professors to share that. Many of you will know that I was quite interested, and you did a lot of work on Henry Nouwen as well as part of the Boysen dissertation. And what I learned from that remarkably anxious guy was his ability to be present and to share in a fun, intellectual, and probing way the vitality of spirituality in the classroom. I say this because the world needs you, and I deeply believe that the church needs you to do the work you're doing, both as theologians that are already PhD'd, and those of you that are going through master's programs and diploma programs and PhDs as well. And St. Mike's needs you to be a serious contributor to the health of Ontario and beyond as well. When, just to close, before we open up for any other comments from Margaret and or myself, I was reminded as I was thinking and discerning and praying a bit about this meeting today, that Teilhard de Chardin, that amazing paleontologist, Jesuit, who was on the cutting edge of theology and really struggled with what people were saying within the church about some of his now amazingly progressive thought, that instability is okay. So this is a prayer you can easily find online called Patient Trust. It's only a few stanzas. But my goodness, when I used to read this, it would remind me as a doctoral student about the instability of being a doctoral student, that progress is made by passing through some stages of instability. This is the time we're in. I neither want to, overemphasize it or underemphasize it. As an ethicist, it's important to be quite open about what we're looking at and what we're assessing. So that's an important skill that St. Mike's has helped me bring both academically, and I've got that clinically as well from other folks that have helped mature me. And remember that perhaps just as we think about who's come before you, that the new spirit working within you is yours and God's to work out. But we don't know really what that will be except over time. And I know as part of the leadership here at Providence Healthcare, we've worked really, really hard to support our staff. As Margaret said, in healthcare and in other sectors, these are very, very difficult times. But the most important resource any institution has is its people. And that's why it's good to pause and do this kind of work. I'll close with just one other thing. I have really appreciated some of the efforts from a comms perspective for St. Mike's to talk about the kinds of services that are up and running. And I would encourage all of us as leaders to share those with students and others that come on campus, because that's part of the transparency of the work that we're doing. So I'm going to close my presentation, and that should stop sharing, I think. And I will come back to you, Anthony. Thank you for hosting this presentation.
Thanks, Chris. That was great. Very informative. If we have any questions, please go ahead. Once we're done, for Margaret and or Chris, if we have any questions at the end that people come up with, we can do that then as well. I guess now we will hear from the library. So between Cheryl and Noel, I don't know who wants to go first, but please.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. I don't know, I don't think I've met everyone. So I'm Cheryl Hook, I'm the Chief Librarian at Kelly Library. Welcome to those of you who are new to USMC, and welcome back to those of you who are returning. So I'm just going to cover a couple of things about the building that will just build off some things that Stephen noted. And I'll talk about how we're communicating with the community. And then Noel is actually going to talk about some of the services that we're providing, just how we're providing services basically in the fall. So first of all, just huge thank you to Stephen and the facilities team, because they have done a tremendous job in making sure that the air quality is good. Throughout the campus, but we've been very sort of particular about the library because we know it's, along with the classroom spaces and the residences, the library is likely to be one of the most used spaces on campus. So anyway, we've just had a lot of support from facilities, and it's been great. We will have, so we do open our doors on Tuesday morning. Our hours, they are posted on the Kelly website, on the USMC website, and also they were posted in the USMC newsletter last week. We will open our doors at 8:30 Tuesday morning. We're open Monday through Thursday until 7:30. Friday, we will close at 4:30. Saturdays we are closed, and we'll open again at 12:30 on Sunday. I think if I'm, oh good, there they are. Noel just popped them into the chat. Thank you, Noel. So we will have a security guard on site to check your status. Basically, when someone enters the library, they have to be fully vaccinated or on their way to being vaccinated. We're just following all of the U of T protocols. So if you are in the process of becoming vaccinated, you will have to show us a clear COVID test. So you probably already know that tomorrow, September 1st, you will be able to go pick up rapid COVID testing at the McCall site at the St. George campus. All of this information is available online. If you need me to set up, to send you anything, just let me know. But you will have to show a negative rapid test before you enter the library if you are in the process of becoming vaccinated. We have to have proof of vaccination if you are already vaccinated. We are mostly only allowing UTR ID holders in, with a few exceptions of regular researchers who would be using the PIMS library or our special collections in the Kelly Library. The Kelly Library appointments they're by appointment only for our special collections. Let's see, the check-in system, it is UTR ID based. Some of us will be able to use the University of Toronto's UCheck system, which Noel has just posted in the chat. this U-Check system will be fully integrated into the federated colleges, but we don't know when that is going to happen. However, if you are a student registered in the conjoint program with TST, if you have any relationship with University of Toronto that gives you a sort of U of T status, as an instructor, like Reed Lachlan is here, he will be able to use the U-Check system. But if you are only associated with a federated college, then you will have to use a different system until we are integrated with U-Check. So just, we will make it very clear once we know the protocols ourselves, everything is coming at us kind of last minute, we will make it very clear on our website how to get into the building. So just right now, all I can say is make sure you've got some way to prove a vaccination status and that you are free of any symptoms and have a barcode or a UTOR ID, and then some form of identification if you do not have your T card with you or you've lost it or something like that. If you have lost your T card, please sign up to get a new one. It may take you a little while, but it will be your easiest way to access any of the buildings or libraries on campus. Okay, so other things that we've done with the building to prepare, our carpets have been professionally cleaned. We've dusted, all the office spaces have been cleaned. All of our furniture as of today has been repositioned in the library. We are, if you were in the library when we opened just a few weeks during the past year, we had to push all of our, most of our furniture aside and just try to do the physical distancing. We are not doing that this year. We feel like that's not a very inviting place. So all of our furniture is going to be back in place, and we'll just have some markers to remind you to physically distance. But I do think we're all very responsible people. We all know we have to remain physically distanced until we hear otherwise. Because I know we've been getting some conflicting information about that. A few weeks ago, U of T announced that there would be no social distancing required in the classrooms or the libraries. Now that's being reconsidered. And so right now we're thinking we do have to be socially distanced throughout the library. The Kelly Cafe will be open and you will be able to eat and drink in the Kelly Cafe. That place absolutely is going to be physically distanced, even if the rest of the library moves into a non-physically distanced scenario, if that's permitted. Let's see. Masks will have to be worn at all times, and we will not be making any medical exemptions for that. If you are unable to wear a mask, we will refer you to another library. We will have security guards monitoring the floors to ensure mask compliance. And you also must be vaccinated or be in the process of becoming vaccinated unless you have a medical exemption. Okay, so that's about the building. Before I move on to our website, does anyone have any questions about the building? Okay, I don't see anyone. With our website, we've done a complete overhaul of our navigation system on the website, hopefully making it more clear for our users how to get access to writing and resource consultations, which I'm sure Noel will talk about, will be online only this year. Also, our website is regularly updated with the latest information that we have about how you can enter the library. So, and all contact information, of course, is available through our website. And I think that's it for me. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me an email, ask me here, whatever you need, we're more than happy to help. And I'm going to turn it over to Noel to talk about specific services that we're offering. Thank you.
Thanks, Cheryl. Just a couple of questions that have come through to me, which are more building oriented. Questions about graduate carrels and access to them, and whether masks will be required if one is in a graduate carrel.
I thought I might get that question. Emil is working on assigning. He's working with, some of you may know Caroline at one of our A&I technicians at the circulation desk, and she's been working with Emil to make the assignments to the carols. So yes, they are available to be assigned, and that is up to Emil to determine who gets those. About the mask, my understanding is that even though you are in a carol situation, because it is open, a mask would be required. So that's what I understand right now.
Then I'll continue. And one of the things which Margaret talked about at the beginning was the differences between people and how different people react to things. And one of the things in the Kelly Library we're committed to is ensuring the ability of students and faculty to use our library services and collections in different ways. So whether that means that if you want to use the collections and services physically in the library, or whether you prefer to use services and collections online, we want you to be comfortable. Cheryl and Steve have talked about some of the physical preparations in the library. And one of the things that we also have to consider is that it keeps changing. Cheryl just sent me an email this morning talking about changes in the last couple of days. And I think we all know that there are going to continue to be changes in the policies and rules that U of T and the province makes. So in the library, we have a reopening committee headed by Cheryl, and they'll continue to respond to those changes as we go forward. One of the things that Cheryl didn't mention that you will notice when you come into the library that's different is that we have plastic screen guards, sneeze guards at our ground floor service desk. So you'll still be able to hear people, but it will be you won't be able to punch us if you get really upset with with an overdue fine or anything like that.
We did have an empty rare books room on the first floor that we could use as like a venting area.
Well, that's a huge change. Is that the rare books have been moved from the ground floor of the library, and also the reference collection has also been moved. So you're going to notice some changes. Some of those things are going to what's new and coming hasn't actually arrived yet. Wait for new messages about that. In the same way that with the policies that you find in the Kelly Library, I think will be reflected largely in a very similar way in other TST libraries. One thing you should know is that Emmanuel and Knox, even though they are only having online classes, their libraries will be open just like the rest of us. One exciting thing, a new service is something, well, at the moment, I think it's called the Get It In Person service, although I'm not sure whether that's the final name. Basically, it's similar in some ways to curbside, that in the catalog, you can now say, I see that this book, that you have this book, I want to take it out. And you can request it in the catalog so that it's like putting in a curbside pickup request, and then you'll get an email response saying, yes, we have it in hand. The book is not missing. We found it on the shelf, and we've got it for you at the circulation desk on the ground floor. So that's a really good service for people who if you are spending time trying to find things, the book will be available for you. And it also means that you don't have to come into the library if the book has been mislaid or something like that. So you'll find that in the catalog. It's called Get It In Person. Make sure when you're using the catalog, the first thing you should do is log in with your user ID. And then then once you've done that once in the catalog, for the rest of your time using the catalog in that period, it knows who you are and knows what services are available to you. Our Kelly Info Express scanning service will be up and running. It's been running during the building closure, but it will be even more robust starting next week. So you can request that a print journal article or a print book chapter be scanned for you, and we will send that to you in email. There are copyright limitations that get in the way of things sometimes, but our staff really try hard not to say, no, we can't do that. They try hard to say, this is what we can do, and these are some alternatives that maybe you'll be able to get. We might suggest that you get something from another library or somewhere else online, or a different edition or something like that. We have a new web form that we're using to for people to request scanning of items. I'm just going to put that address into the chat if you haven't seen it already. The reason for that new web form is so that we have a legal record that we are following copyright law and getting permissions for things. So that's, if you've used the Kelly Info Express service in the past, you've probably done it through email. The way to use it now, most of the time, is, at least to initiate a request, is through the web form. And other TST libraries will be continuing scanning services. If you remember, BC, before COVID, the Kelly Library was, well, we're still at the top with the Kelly Info Express scanning service, but there are other TST libraries are doing scanning as well now, and will continue to respond to scanning requests either through their web form or through an email to those libraries. We have a really robust acquisition program for print and electronic materials at the moment. And one of the things that COVID has really encouraged is increased cooperation between the different TST libraries about the purchase of materials, both print and electronic. As of this week, we are losing access to HathiTrust, which has provided us access to many electronic materials in the past year. The reason for that going is because the agreement is that either we have materials available in print and that we are loaning out, or we have materials available on HathiTrust, and we're not allowed to do both. So since beginning next Tuesday, we're providing material. People are able to come into our libraries and take out print materials. That means that we are losing HathiTrust. But we still have a hugely increased in the past year at the TST libraries access to theology and religion ebooks. One of the things which is neat about that is even if you don't like to read ebooks, it's a much better way for you to select books. So if you find a book in the catalog that looks like it might be interesting and it's available as an ebook, you can confirm that it's useful for you by checking out looking at the ebook, but then you can come into the library to take out the print book as well. Intercampus delivery is going to be restored this coming week. So that means that books that are at UT Mississauga, UT Scarborough, or our storage facility, UT Downsview, will all be available to us again. You can put requests in through the catalog and ask for those books to be sent to the Kelly Library so that you can pick them up at the Kelly Library. interlibrary loan, where those, with materials which are not available at U of T at all. Interlibrary loan is fully restored both for journal articles and for print books. So you can put in a request for that item in Gujarati, and we'll get it from a library, even if it's a library in India, and the book will be brought. Usually you can request which library you want to pick it up at, either Robarts or Gerstein. The TST libraries are planning a number of cooperative library instruction sessions. So we'll be sending out emails over the next month, advertising various Zoom sessions about the catalog, about how to search for journal articles, about using a bibliographic citation manager, other things like that. Again, we've done a much better job of cooperating with the other TST libraries than in the past. You can continue to send email research questions to me, and even more important, I think, the access problems that you're having with online sources. Sometimes links don't work. Many of you might have seen where you get into a loop where you find a journal article, or at least you find a citation to a journal article. It sends you to the University of Toronto Library Catalog, and the University of Toronto Library Catalog sends you back to the Atla Religion database, which is where you started, and it still isn't there. This is a little problem that we've had for the last 8 months, and in spite of lots of hard work on the part of U of T library staff, it hasn't been fixed yet. So if you get into one of those loops, it's not your fault. There's a system problem where it's saying that every journal article that's listed in the Atla Religion database is available at U of T. And of course, it's not everything is included. So if you get into one of those loops, the thing to do is to email me, and I can try to work something out. Cheryl mentioned that appointments for our writing and research help are all going to be online this coming semester. In some ways that makes it a lot easier, I think, than people having to come into the library. They can just set it up online. I know for research appointments with myself, I know that about half of our classes are in the evening because people are have other things in the day, working with full-time jobs. So I'll also have online appointments available in the evening as well, if you want to meet with me for research purposes. And I'll continue to send out a monthly list of new religion ebooks that the Kelly Library has purchased. And as I said in one of those recent emails to you, I said, if you're not finding something of interest on that list, email me and say, I'm not finding books on my topic or books from the particular perspective that I need. I'm interested in knowing what items, what kinds of materials you want. So if you're not finding interesting material listed on those lists of new books, I want to hear from you. I'm sure that there are some questions that for Cheryl and myself now. Oh, there's a question from Susan about the get it in person option. Did you mean that we can use this still after curbside pickup is finished? Can you explain? Yes, Susan. So curbside pickup is ending this week. And that means that if you want a print book, you actually have to come into the library. But get it in person allows you to be sure that the book is there. I'm sure most of us have had this problem where we go usually to Robarts and can't find the book on the shelf. It says it's on the shelf, in the catalog, but when we get to the shelf, it isn't there. So get it in person means that you can put a request in. Our staff in the library will go to the shelf, get the book, bring it downstairs to the ground floor, email you and say, we've got the book, it's waiting for you.
I should just add, this is a new service from the University of Toronto Libraries with the new search platform that we adopted last year. So this is true for any faculty member, any student, including undergraduate students. You can ask that the book basically it's a pick and hold. We go to the shelf and pick it off for you, and we bring it down to the circulation desk, and it'll be there ready for you to pick up. But that's why our Info Express service has changed just a little bit, and that we won't deliver books anymore to faculty offices, because we're already now going up to the shelf and bringing them down for everybody in the community to the circulation desk.
There's a question about loan periods. And yes, we are moving back to the well, no, I'm not sure that it is the BC. All I know is that it's different for loan periods.
We have
and I'm looking at the page which tells me about that, and I'm trying to figure out where it says about that.
We've made some modifications, and it is updated on the website.
Yeah. I can't see that. There's no one date when everything is due. So basically just try to renew your books. And if it says that you've already had too many renewals, then you'll have to bring them back. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact bit about that. I'm just looking at other questions that have come through to me in chat. Yeah. Anything else? You can ask questions out loud if you want. Just unmute yourself. Okay. Anthony.
Thanks, Noel. Thanks, Cheryl. I'm sure if anybody has questions, they can email you or email us, and then we'll forward them along to you. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll see some of you. So yeah, just a reminder. So we are hosting our Welcome Day in person on September the 8th, Wednesday. I believe it's beginning at 4 with the AGM. And we're in Alumni Hall 400, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Emil's nodding his head. So yeah, so hopefully we'll see most of you, if not all of you there. It'll be nice to catch up with everyone. Yeah, and if you have any questions in the meantime, I mean, you can always email me, email Emil, and hopefully we'll be able to answer your questions.
What's the capacity for that room?
It's pretty big, so it should be okay. I think. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you guys soon.
Darren has something.
It is the case, though, that for those who are unable to make the Welcome Day, it will be recorded and posted online.
That's great.
So if you're unable to make it, it will be just like this is being recorded and posted online. If you're unable to make the Welcome Day in person, don't worry. It will be posted so you can catch up on the information that you might need as we begin the school year.
Thanks, Darren.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.